Well, my name's Emma Wilson. I'm the Communications and Engagement Officer for Research and Innovation at GMMH. Really happy that you're here today for our second in the Research into Practice series, which is innovation. And we're going to hear from John Sainsbury, our Innovation Manager, about a number of different sort of threads in the work that he does for research and innovation.
Thanks, Emma, and thanks to Emma for all her work in preparing this webinar and promoting it. So I'm going to speak about research and innovation. As you can see, innovation is underlined because it's often not talked about, this kind of element of the department. So this is an opportunity today to share some of the work that's going on in the department and what we've been developing really over the past 5 years. There are three main strands of activity for the innovation team. But before going into that, I'd like to just define innovation because it has various meanings for various people, really. And I think the definition that I like is that innovation is something that's new to the world, or it's new to the domain or context, which is successfully adopted and is a step change in the way that things are delivered or received. So it's different from continuous improvement or quality improvement. It's a significant different way of doing business or implementing an intervention or running an organization. So if you take the difference between a landline phone and a mobile phone, that's a step change. The two are incredibly different products. So that's what we're talking about. So I will give some examples of our real-world pilot projects into health technology that we've been working on. I'll also touch upon the use of patient data for research and innovation and what's going on in Greater Manchester currently, and specifically in relation to Greater Manchester mental health patient data. And I'll also explain very briefly, it's a 2-day workshop, so I'll touch on that, but just give you a quick overview really of systematic innovation training, which I'm authorized and qualified to deliver. Example of a workshop that's been run and the outputs of that, but also an opportunity to sign up for the training. So in terms of innovation projects, well, I'm going to explain the difference between research and innovation. I'm going to show you the innovation project pipeline, which we have borrowed, and with the generous sharing, to be honest, of colleagues in Manchester Foundation Trust, their innovation hub, which received Health Foundation funding over a period of years. They developed a robust pipeline for screening all the way to evaluating digital health technology, and they've shared their pipeline processes with us, and we've adopted them within the trust. And I'll also show you some examples of inquiries. So inquiries are right at the start of that pipeline. But first, let's explain the difference between research and real-world pilot. So in research, the aim is to generate evidence or test a theory or product. It's managed by a research team, and it's driven by a hypothesis. It uses rigorous methodology and is subject to ethical approval. The outcomes of research are sometimes novel insights or theories or evidence generation, or that didn't work. Let's go back and ask some different questions. Innovation, or real-world pilots in our case, is to test real-world evidence-based interventions. These are managed by clinical teams and supported by the innovation team, and they're driven by a flexible and adaptable implementation plan. And the outcomes of such projects is the production adoption, the adoption of a product and the process of learning. All that adds up to knowledge for further projects, but also a service evaluation, which can then feed into a business case. So even though these worlds are similar, they are different. However, there is a bi-directional relationship between innovation projects and research. And I'll give you a good example here, which is it's the other way around, where actually there was an innovation project in the trust, which was massed, which was led by IM&T colleagues with the support of the innovation team in research and innovation. It was piloted in Bolton and Trafford in 2019 and 2020. It was thought to be reasonably successful, The staff liked it. There seemed to be some benefits in terms of time saved and reduction in stress and so on of staff who used it. And so it was then decided upon to scale it. And it's now scaled across 4 of our kind of regions where the CMHTs are using it. 15 CMHTs are now using MAST. And MAST stands for Management and Supervision Tool. And it's basically, an algorithm-driven data dashboard of service user information that's presented to the CMHTs to help them make decisions. And it's driven by an algorithm of risk of crisis. How likely is somebody to require an admission to hospital or home-based treatment or A&E in the next 28 days? And also complexity. And the complexity weighting is dependent upon how much resource, how many teams, how many people, how much support might somebody require based on their history or their current complexity. Having used it for 5 years in the Trust, we've applied for various research grants, and I've heard the general rate of success is like 1 in 10. And after our 5th application, we were successful within the University of Manchester to secure some funding to undertake a mixed methods evaluation of MAST. And we want to know, is it efficacious? Does the algorithm work? Is it reliable? Does it help staff? So we're looking at both the data and the algorithms. So the quantitative side of MAST, does it stand up? Can we break it? Can we improve it? Of course, in a safe environment, not at the front line where clinicians are using it. But we also do want to meet clinicians. We want to see how they're using it in zoning meetings. We want to see how it's being used in supervision. And we also want to see how it's being used in individual practice and to speak to care coordinators and doctors and managers and to interview them about their use of MAST. Or if they're not using MAST, then why is that the case? And how are they managing? How are they making decisions? So it's a really exciting and interesting project that's now in play within this trust. If you do work in a CMHT, and this is an unapologetic plea, do get in touch, because there's an opportunity to invite the researchers to observe a zoning meeting or to come and interview you or members of your team to hear about your use of MAST or not. So that's an example, and the findings from that will then feed in, because the trust wants to know these questions about its reliability and its efficacy, but also, is it value for money? And if it's proven to be such, then that will feed back into the implementation of MAST. It might strengthen its position in the trust and its wider adoption. And then in the second year, we'll go back and we'll repeat these observations and interviews. And through that iterative cycle of research and implementation, maybe we hope that MAST will be stronger. It'll be kind of robust in its evidence base, and it will be used to benefit patients and staff within the trust. So this is the pipeline that I talked about at the start, which is the innovation project pipeline shared with us and then adopted locally from MFT, and it has these various stages. So the first stage is inquiry, where we might be approached by a health tech company who hears about us or sees our information on the internet, or is introduced by the kind of regional research delivery network, sponsored by the NIHR, or through a local academic who's developed something, and they've developed a university spin-out company, and they approach us and say, look, we'd like to test this in real world. We'd like your support, and they'll approach us. And we see many of these, and I'll give you some examples in a minute. We'll then screen their application. We've got a form, an inquiry form, which we'll ask them to populate. We'll also check with the team, or service areas. Is there a need for this? What's the current problem? Will this solution solve a problem that is pressing, that nothing else is working for? What's the evidence base? So we'll ask the company to share their evidence base. We'll look at NICE. We'll see what NICE are saying. Have they evaluated it? Have they made a recommendation? Having checked the staff interest locally, as well as the clinical need, and if there's an appetite within a team, then we'll progress. We'll also ensure that it aligns with the trust strategy and the trust values, that we're happy with the ethics of the company and the product and the intervention that they're providing. And finally, we'll look at the financial envelope. How much will this cost? What resources are available? What's the return on investment that's been seen elsewhere with such a project? We'll then take the next step. We'll decide to go, to progress. So there's a decision gate at that point between screening and implementation. And then there's a whole range of governance steps, which I'll explain with examples later in the presentation. And then when running the pilot, we'll be gathering feedback from staff, from service users, from the company. We'll provide ongoing support as a team to the clinical team. We'll challenge teething problems with good relationships with the industry partner. And then there'll be local adaptations. Nothing is just drop and or plug and play, as they say. Often there's lots of local requirements and local adaptations that need to be made. And throughout, we'll consider the evaluation. How can we evaluate this? What's required? What measures will we be capturing throughout this process of running this pilot, so that we've got sufficient and adequate and good quality data that can then feed into the evaluation to help us review the project, not necessarily claim efficacy, because there'll be in real world pilots, there are no control groups, but we can look at user experience. We can look at staff satisfaction. We can hear from service users. We can learn from the adoption process in itself. So I'm going to walk through each of these 5 steps of our innovation pipeline process and annotate with examples. So here are some examples of inquiries that we've had recently. So one is Psyomics, which is a spin out from Cambridge University. And that is it's quite a mature product, which basically enables service users, before they come into contact with services, to complete a whole range of questions, psychometric questions and psychological questions, to understand the nature of their presenting condition, their experiences. And those are then presented graphically and analysed, and enable staff at the front door to make decisions as to what is the most suitable pathway for that service user. We're just at the early stages of conversations with Psyomics. We're waiting for a service evaluation from another trust. So watch this space. BrainGaze is another product that we've been introduced to recently. And this is it's a diagnostic tool for children and adults to determine if they have ADHD, ASD, or dyslexia, using the eyes. So it's using something called cognitive vergence, which is how the eyes move and how they focus in on a certain object as the eyes move. And they're claiming quite significant levels of accuracy. We've partnered with them to apply for a research grant, and this might be coming to the trust at some point in this year or early in 2026 if that funding application has been successful. Alpha Stim is another project or product that's been brought to our attention recently. This has been around for many years, and the company is still generating evidence. And we're interested to see that there's a big study going on in the States. NICE have said that it looks encouraging, but currently NICE have not made a recommendation for it to be used in frontline services. So we're looking with Alpha StimAid to see how we can support with their evidence generation. And then the final example, and these are just some of the many that come our way, is a company called Blue Sky, who have a facial recognition and eye movement detection system using cameras on mobile phones. So it's an app that it claims to read sentiment and monitor eye gaze and concentration and awareness on a topic, on a subject, on a screen, and make some assessments of that. I think it's very interesting. I think there's lots of potential for this, and we've shared this with one of our 11 research units who have expressed an interest in Blue Sky and a possible future collaboration. So there's just a taste of some of the inquiries that come our way. And one of those products that came our way is CareLoop Health. And CareLoop is a spin out from Manchester University. We've put it through our screening process, which I'll explain, and we're commencing the implementation process with CareLoop currently. I'm going to play this short video just to give you a sense of what CareLoop is. Oh, sorry, that's my. There we go. Great. So that's a really nice introductory video that's been produced by the CareLoop team to be shared with service users. So let me talk you through our screening process that we applied to CareLoop when it came to the department. So the first thing to do is to consider the evidence base, both of the product, but first of all, what is the evidence to support the need for this product? And the example here, this spine-like graph, is a project that was undertaken by Cambridge University. It was a data analysis of the data of 56 NHS trusts, mental health trusts, and their admissions over a period of time, studying the admissions of 232,000 patients over over a long period of time. And what they discovered was that 20%, this line down the middle, that 20% of those people were readmitted to hospital within 6 months. That's a lot of people. If you're considering 230,000, that's a significant number of people. And so if CareLoop, which claims to be able to reduce relapse and alert staff in advance of a full-blown relapse that would require an admission, if CareLoop works to reduce admissions, then that's really great for everybody, for the service user, their family, for staff, and for services, and also can bring, health economic benefit. So we also looked at the evaluation or the studies that have occurred with the CareLoop product over time. And we also looked at what NICE have suggested. And NICE have suggested, having undertaken an early value assessment of CareLoop, have suggested that it can be used in frontline services whilst further evidence is generated. And so we're trying to support that. We're not undertaking a randomized control trial, but through this pilot, again, we might be able to look at, usage, adherence, people remaining on the product, but also staff experiences. How is it? How does it work? Is it helpful? Does it mix with your current pathways? And is it an extra burden, or is it a benefit to your workflow? We've checked the clinical team's appetite, and there are staff in one of the early intervention teams within the trust who are willing to explore this, or interested in exploring it, and can see some of the benefits. And we've also scrutinized the health tech company's governance. So this is an example on the bottom right, this diagram of the clinical risk management file. So all the scrutiny that the company have applied to their own work, the safety of the product, the data security of the product, adverse events that might historically have occurred or not, as the case may be, for service users using the product. So we would look at these in great detail before taking them further into the implementation process. Having done that, we've now crossed the threshold and we've undertaken the governance. We've got a data protection impact assessment with the trust and care loop. We've signed a heads of terms agreement or a contract with care loop to undertake this pilot. We've undertaken clinical safety workshops, which is known as a structured what if technique. So we ask staff, what might go wrong? What could a problem be? What do you think might happen either for the end users or in your experience of using the dashboard, or what might break down? And if that was the case, what the hazards might be, what the cause might be, and what the impact might be for service users if these things happen. And then we try and put mitigations in place, build those into the training, and educate staff so that mitigations are understood, embraced, and woven into the deployment of the product. So we've undertaken the structured what-if exercise, we've developed a hazard log, and the clinical safety clinical safety document is in preparation. We've also involved service users in the co-development of this leaflet to educate them on care loop, because what we understand is that informed consent is so crucial, because they will be sharing very sensitive data around their experiences of psychosis with an industry partner, which will then be shared back with the trust. And for them to have that informed consent, we felt that they need really clear, really understandable information. And so we've worked with service users to produce that with the company. And that's been signed off by service users and has now been shared with staff to give to service users that point of engagement in the product. We've also trained the staff in onboarding service users to this and also responding to alerts. And we've developed these planning documents, or kind of, in a way, process maps for onboarding a service user, and also what to happen if their symptoms, their early warning symptoms, trigger an alert. What are the staff meant to do? And so we're right now on the threshold of implementation and running the pilot. I'd like to introduce another project which is further along the pipeline than CareLoop, and this is XRT for short, or XR Therapeutics. And I'll explain the implementation and going live process that we're now involved in, and also share some feedback from service users and from family members. So first of all, what is XRT? So it looks like this. So it's virtual reality, but on a flat screen. The developers thought that virtual reality headsets were possibly too claustrophobic or too uncomfortable for service users with autism or learning disabilities or other special needs. And so they thought, well, let's experiment with a large screen virtual reality scene and see if that helps. And they generated evidence that seems to show it seems to be helpful. There are early signals that this is beneficial to service users. It's actually changing their experience of their fears and giving them some confidence. So it's classed as a digital therapeutic intervention. It's exposure therapy, which means if people are afraid of something, they have a specific phobia, then images of that and videos of being exposed to that scene or that needle or somebody vomiting or taking a bus or taking a plane could be presented on the screen, and the service user experiences anxiety in the room. They're in a therapy room in a clinic in Bolton, and their palms may become sweaty, their breathing become tense, they might be looking down, and these defensive behaviors might start kicking in, and they might want to leave. They feel uncomfortable. And so they give an exposure to this to develop resilience, to realize that they're feeling anxious, if they learn some grounding techniques and some breathing techniques and some self-soothing concepts, that they're able to manage their experience and overcome their fear. So this pilot is now live in Bolton. And what have we done to get there? Well, I'm not going to explain all the inquiry, screening, and implementation steps that we've gone through, because otherwise we'll be here, for the rest of the webinar. But these images here are some of the outputs of the implementation process. A clear process map for the therapist supporting service users through this. A clear checklist, though implementation can't happen through checklists. It's complex, but a checklist can be very helpful. And if anybody's interested in checklists, I'd recommend Atul Gawande's Checklist Manifesto, where he changed the mortality rate in surgery through the implementation of a checklist. So I'm a real fan. In small measure, you can't checklist everything, but we created one for therapists just as they're starting out. And then also, again, a leaflet for service users and for their families, along with a training manual. So those things have been produced and shared with the staff. We've gone live, and we went live in a sensible way, not through any sense of mind, but through the actual clinical leads here, who thought, rather than putting all the therapists in the room one at a time with families, let's just, the leadership team, 2 therapists, take it together, bring service users and the family into the room and walk through the therapy manual, walk through the protocol, the treatment protocol, and learn to use the technology. And that was a really sensible decision through this tandem way of working with service users and the families and the technology. They were able to overcome teething problems. The tech wasn't working, it was glitching, the scenes that they wanted weren't there. There was somebody swimming where there was a no swimming sign. Somebody, I mean a digital character swimming through the sea on a relaxation scene where there was a no swimming sign. For somebody with autism, there was a rule being clearly broken, which didn't help them relax. But thankfully, the company have resolved that. And this is one of the benefits of this pilot, that we've been able to work really closely in great collaboration with the company. They've responded quickly to our requests. The technology is advanced. Any glitches that we found have been resolved. And they've developed new scenes that have been suitable for the children that have been brought in Bolton CAMHS, such as classroom scenes, and more children avatars, as they're called, the characters in XR. And so there's been this local adaptation of the product to suit our needs. So what have the learnings been so far? Well, I think brilliant leadership from the local clinicians that will take the plunge first, and that willingness to take responsibility and cope with learning in the live scene, which is quite tricky when you've got patients and families who might have been waiting for a long time for therapy to learn something on the hoof. And also the quality of relationship with the innovation partner is imperative, really, and the flexibility of the innovative partner to listen to NHS clinicians and adapt with us. I think those are some of the learnings that we've taken away so far. But there are some case studies I'd like to share, and they have been shared with the team, and families are happy because some of the families have been so moved and so amazed by the swiftness of this therapy for their children. Some have felt that their child will be stuck forever with this phobia, and it's been so impactful on the family life and the child's ability to engage in holidays or going to school or going to clinical appointments. And so there is examples of a child who is afraid of seeing the doctor, who was exposed to clinical scenes in using XR, and has now visited the doctor, has had various tests taken, and the family have said they are amazed and they'd like so many children to be able to access this. There's another example of a child who was afraid of kind of adverse weather conditions. They must maybe watch too many terrible news programs of the awful scenes that we see of strong weather systems that have been hitting the world recently, and so has not been able to go to places with the family. Through XR intervention, they've regained their confidence. They feel more comfortable going out, and they've now taken trips that previously would have been impossible. Another example of a child who had fear of vomiting, so much so that was avoiding school at times, um, was exposed to various protracted, noisy vomiting scenes in XR Therapeutics, so much so that it turns your stomach, even though you know it's digital. But through that exposure, was able to regain confidence, sit in school, and there's a story of him sitting in school and hearing somebody retching behind him, and rather than running to the hills, he turned around and asked the kid, "How are you doing? Are you okay?" And a few days later, his sister had a bout of vomiting, and he was absolutely cool. And the family were again amazed by the change in his reaction to this. So there's some early feedback. We've partnered with Greater Manchester Applied Research Collaborative or Research Centre to undertake an independent evaluation of this pilot project to help us explore the return on investment or staff experiences, and perhaps build the evidence for a larger research application in the future to build efficacy data to strengthen the business case and evidence health economic impact. Another example of again a virtual reality project, which I've been involved with now for over 2 years, is Game Change. And I'll talk about the implementation and the evaluation. So as you can see, we're moving along the project pipeline. And I'll share this brief video before we progress. So that video was an output of the RCT. At the end of the randomized controlled trial, I was given the opportunity to work with two brilliant members of staff from the Research and Innovation Department. Liz Murphy on the left, who's a clinical psychologist and was the trial manager for the Game Change RCT in Greater Manchester Mental Health, and Heather Peel, who, as you can see, is in full I can't remember the name of the term, kind of protective gear that was used during COVID, because Heather was responsible for facilitating the Game Change intervention, visiting people at home during COVID. So it was a very challenged research environment. But the two did incredibly well and recruited tens of people, scores of people, in fact, into the trial within the trust. And they then worked with me to deploy this into real world settings. So they supported the translation, almost maintaining as close fidelity as possible to the protocol used in the trial, and developing checklists and moving the treatment manual across into the real world, developing a whole range of of implementation support aids so that staff on the front line were able to understand, be trained, and adopt game change. The biggest challenge we found was finding suitable service users. And the evidence suggests that there should be about 70% of service users with psychosis with agoraphobia. In Paris, we found 0.7% of those 6,000 people in the trust, under the trust services, with agoraphobia and psychosis. So we couldn't find them just through a BI report. We did find them through using MAST, which you've heard about earlier, by filtering service users by psychosis and sitting next to staff and saying, do you have somebody with agoraphobia who has psychosis? But it remains a challenge to find these people who might be at home, just quiet, receiving a depot once a month, causing no trouble. It's really difficult for the staff to find them and to offer them this intervention, which we've heard, has got evidence to support it. The enablers for game change really have been the appetite of staff, the enthusiasm of mental health wellbeing practitioners and assistant psychologists and support workers, and the team around them, the psychologists and the managers and the doctors who've embraced this have been real enablers, as well as the excellent support of Heather and Liz in the early stages of the pilot. And the barriers have been capacity challenges, have been demand and capacity issues within the team, risk prioritization, and retention challenges within CMHTs. But what we've found is that it has stuck to some degree. We've found that service users have been able to engage with game change in the real world, that there have been improvements at an individual level in certain people's lives. In fact, life-changing experience of increasing confidence, reducing distress, able to overcome their anxiety. And there are some, I'll just very briefly touch on these. The graph on the left shows the comparison of reduction in distress during our pilot in comparison to the RCT, and you can see it's not a parallel line, but the starting point is similar and the end is not so far off. So we can see there was a reduction in distress for the people who received it during our pilot. And there's an individual case example of a 35-year-old woman whose distress reduced over the period of 8 sessions, and she was able to increase her confidence, go out with her son, go out with parents from school, and attend conferences and do things she never thought would be possible. We still know that there are people at home afraid of going out, and so Game Change is still live within the trust. We're still able to offer it to our service users. And we've also engaged with the technology developers at Oxford University and will now be partners in a real world pilot, which will be a multi-site research study to see how can this be deployed at scale across the NHS. Very briefly, I'm going to touch on the use of patient data for research, what's happening in Greater Manchester, and communicating the secure data environment across our trust. So we know that patient data can be used at scale to know more about disease and treatments, to develop new treatments, and to tackle health inequalities by studying the demographics. How do psychological therapies work for different conditions? What are the risks for specific illnesses and treatments for specific patient groups? And also, what's the interface between pre-existing physical health conditions and mental health? So by merging data sets from primary care, from secondary care, from different hospitals, de-identifying those, one can pose questions which are not possible to answer at a local level, or even with groups of hundreds of patients. If you want to know more, I'd encourage you to look at Understanding Patient Data, which is a website and a company which is incredibly knowledgeable in this subject and has lots of informational what kind of videos and infographics and journals that you can read. This is an overview of the structure of what's known as the GM shared care record, where hospitals and primary care are sharing identifiable data that's used for first primary care use or primary use in different settings, but it's then de-identified. Patients can opt out of this, into what's known as the shared care record, where researchers, using the 5 safes, the safe data, safe projects, safe people, safe settings, and safe outputs, can access the data through a screen process of evaluating whether this research project meets those 5 safes, and then giving access to the data so they can answer their questions. This is in early phase within Greater Manchester, and soon GMMH data will be moving in there. The GM wide as kind of the GM Secure Data team, Health Innovation Manchester and AHS Greater Manchester, have promoted this across GM on trams and bus stop stations and in the news and other media, kind of through websites and social media, to let service users know, to let the population of Greater Manchester know that the existence of the GM Share Care record is there and it's used, but also that data will be used for research purposes. We are in planning phase of communicating this more widely, and this webinar is one of those first opportunities to share this initiative with our staff members and with service users, and we'll embark on a much wider communication strategy and plan and deployment over the next few months. In brief now, in the last minute, I'll share systematic innovation training. What does that mean? This is Darren Mann, who I learnt this methodology from at Buckingham University, and it's a way of exploring complex problems through this method known as Compass. Like, where are we going for? Who's in that? What are the stakeholders? What are the barriers to resolving the problem? What resources are at hand? What inventive principles, idea generation tools can we use? And also, do our ideas fit within the context? An example of using systematic innovation training with a team was bringing together an MDT of dual diagnosis workers, nurses, pharmacists, to look at how we can deploy take-home naloxone in acute mental health settings for people on leave or at the point of discharge. And we walked them through the COBRA methodology over 2 years. And what came from that was standard operating procedure, an implementation plan. We've trained 100 staff, and there's now greater awareness and education of service users on these wards around take-home naloxone of people who are known opiate users. And there's also an increase in prescribing and dispensing of take-home naloxone for people, which we hope will save lives for people who are at risk of an overdose following an admission to an acute inpatient setting. Finally, I'd like to just introduce you to the opportunity to undertake some training and systematic innovation that's run through the Trust Recovery Academy. It's coming up in a couple of weeks' time. And through that training, you'd notice psychological inertia. When you think, oh, this is good enough, we've got a good enough solution, this should work. When we think that, we might have a problem and we think we've jumped to a conclusion, a solution, how we can break through that and go beyond it using various thinking styles, using a range of tools, those COBRA tools, to analyze complexity, use inventive principles, of which there are 40. And the first one is turn it round. Another one is local quality. What can we do there? Another is to use like the Swift cheese. How can we look through something entirely? And then generate robust solutions so that you eventually walk away after the 2 days with a better understanding of the problem, its complexity, and some tools to take away for future problems. So it's a toolkit that can be used elsewhere. So to sum up the webinar with 3 minutes over, what have we learned? Well, we've got an idea now of the innovation project pipeline that's in place in GMMH for new products that come our way. There's an opportunity, if you hear of products, innovation-based in health tech products, do come to us. We've had approaches from staff members in the past. We've touched upon patient data for research, and you've also heard about systematic innovation training, examples from a clinical case, but also the opportunity to either invite me to a team, if you'd like a whole team to receive the training, or to come to the Recovery Academy course and learn as an individual how this approach might help you solve problems in your workplace. Thanks, Emma.
Thanks so much, John. I know we've past the time of when we said the webinar would finish. We've got one question that's been submitted ahead of time and one question that's on our Q&A. So I'll at least ask two, but if there's any final ones, write them in now and we'll try and quickly box them off. So I had a question submitted ahead of time that said, what if I've got a brilliant idea for some health technology? Could you help me shape that into an innovation?
Absolutely. Well, we can have that conversation and see where it is on its technology readiness journey, and what support might be required to generate evidence and build a team and find resources. So absolutely, we're open to that kind of conversation.
Fab. And we've got John's contact details on the last slide as well, so we will share those. And we had Laura during the presentation said, "Hi John, super interesting. With XR therapy, how does it work if a child comes in with a phobia that is not already made into a virtual reality? Do you have to do an initial assessment with the children to understand their phobia and then go to the developers? Also, if this is the case, how quick is it to make a new VR scene?" There's quite a few questions here. Um, so I guess like how bespoke can you make the XRT kind
It's a
of
really great question, and yes, it's possible. And of course, every child has an assessment with the therapist to understand the nature of their phobia and their anxiety, and then we'll develop a treatment plan with the family, either in XR or outside in the real world, not in a digital world, to try and expose them to that phobia. If the XR environment doesn't exist, then the company are flexible. And of course, it's good for them as well as for the clients to have a range. But they think they've developed the vast majority of environments to treat the highest number of phobias. There are a few that might emerge, and the company, as I said, have developed some new environments to meet the needs of service users in Bolton. How long it takes? Well, I guess it depends on the backlog of jobs that the tech company have in XRT, but it's reasonably quick. Some things have been turned around within a month to 6 weeks, which is a bit of a wait for the service user. But if it then has that effect of 4 treatments and they've recovered, then it's worth the wait.
I remember when we went to a demonstration about it, they showed, for example, if someone had a fear of dogs, they had a park setting, but you could also change the background setting. And then they had different styles of dogs, sizes, breeds, if there was something specific. And you could make that dog really tiny or really big. Like it was so customizable to the thing.
Mm,
And at least on the dog front, they had an awful lot of options there, which I hadn't even thought about that before. It was really
mhm.
interesting.
And lots
Um,
of the environments are like that, Emma. They're bespoke, and there's lots of control that the staff have an iPad or similar kind of tablet that they can control according to degree of exposure that is tolerable for the child.
yeah. So, without further ado, I'm really, really grateful that you came today. Thank you so much for staying and taking part. Um, John's contact details are at the top of the screen right there. As you might expect, it's his first name dot surname at gmmh.nhs.uk. But we also, if you haven't seen it already, have a specific part of the GMMH website for research and innovation. You can go and look at active studies that are on there, see the participant information sheets, see if there's any that you could be eligible to participate in, either as someone delivering it or as a participant. And we also have our social media channels as well, where we like to let you know what publications have come out recently from GMMH. So you can go and read the evidence base if you like, and any articles that we've put out there. So do give us a follow, do have a look through that website as well. And if you've got any questions, do contact John if it's anything innovation related. And for any other general questions about getting involved in R&I, we have ask about research at gmmh.nhs.uk, and we'd love to hear from you. So I relinquish you to the rest of your Wednesday afternoon. Hope you have a lovely, lovely day. Enjoy the sunshine and have a great week. And hopefully we'll see you again soon. Thanks very
Thanks, Emma.
much.